When writers adapt fairy tales, what do they change? And more importantly, why do they make those changes? We notice two big changes authors tend to make. They change the characters and they change the events. When a writer makes one change, say changing Little Red Riding Hood from a girl to a duck, that one change changes other things. It's like a domino that falls over and pushes other little things to change. Today, I want to teach you that when writers plan how an adaptation story will go, they do two things. First, they decide on a change that they think will improve the story. And second, they make sure that the change leads to other changes so the whole story fits together. Often, one big adaptation cascades like a row of dominoes through the writer's adaptation of the fairy tale. Before a person can think about the possible adaptation, it helps to have the original well in mind. So I'm going to list in my mind the main things that happened in Little Red Riding Hood. I want you to take a moment, pause this video, and see if you can remember the main things that happened as well. Now comes the hard part. We need to think, what is an important way in which we can change the elements of the story to make it even better? I usually start by thinking, is there a part or an aspect to the story that I don't really agree with the way it is now? Is there a reason to change the story? Let's recall the main events in Little Red Riding Hood. As we go, think, is there a reason that we do not love the message of the story or the way it goes? Let's review the plot to the story. First, Little Red Riding Hood's mother sends her with a basket of goodies to her grandma's house. Second, a wolf tells Little Red Riding Hood to stop and look at the pretty flowers. 3, the wolf eats grandma. 4, the wolf pretends to be grandma. 5, Little Red Riding Hood questions the wolf. 6, the wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood. And 7, the hunter saves Little Red Riding Hood and grandma. You might have had another plot point that you thought was important, or maybe you thought one of mine wasn't so important, and that's okay because it's all of us are creating our own stories and adaptations. I want you to think about a big reason to change this story. What might not be so great about it? Do you see that first you think about the way to improve the original story? Someone could decide to change a fairy tale because they thought that the fairy tales too often are set in the country, and maybe they might decide to write a city version. What else could it be? Let's look at some of the ways authors adapted fairy tales from the books in our digital classroom. You might have read some of these as well. Some that I saw are changing the character. We read yesterday how they changed Little Red Riding Hood from a girl to a duck, or you can make it any animal. I also saw one that was changing her into a superhero, or changing the hunter into a woodcutter. People also changed the events. I saw them change it from Little Red Riding Hood walking through the woods to Little Red Riding Hood being in Africa. I also saw them have something old-fashioned and changing into something modern, like Little Red Riding Hood riding her bike. You can also change the motivation from helping a sick grandma to making grandma happy. You can also change it from someone being sweet to being conceited or full of themselves. I think all of these adaptations are really great. The other thing to remember is that one change makes other changes. None of these stories were exactly the same. They all had little changes along the way. Think about your story and ask those important and hard questions. What do you love about your fairy tale, if anything? And how might you change it? Here is your job for today. Get your plans written down in your writer's notebook. I don't want you to write the plans as a story. Don't start with once upon a time or try to tell every single detail bit by bit in a story sort of way. But I do want you to write lots of details about how things will change and how they'll go. I want you to write in full sentences and in paragraph. It might sound like this. In my story, there will be a character named, you might change her name, and like in the classic story, she will still, and you say what she'll still do, similar to the original story. And when the story starts, I'm thinking she will be, and you might write your first change. Don't forget to write about how your changes the things later on in the story, kind of like that domino effect. My other suggestion is to be hard on yourself. After you write a little bit, take a moment and think over your plan. You might draw a line and write a whole new plan of a new great idea. And then after you're done writing, you can choose which one you think is the best for you to continue writing during our unit. Your brainstorm of how to change your story is your assignment for Class Dojo today. So when you're all done writing your ideas, I want you to take a picture of your notes and send them to me so I can read them as well. Before you go, let's talk for a moment about how one change might affect other elements of the story. If I change something about a character, then other changes will follow, just like one domino knocking into the next. If you change the character, that might make you need to change the setting, the motivation and trouble, and the resolution. Here's an example from the story 3 Billy Goats Gruff. If we change the billy goats into house cats, then the setting will change as well. They'll probably live in a house. And they will probably want to eat big, juicy mice instead of sweet, tender grass. And probably the humans would get in their way. The resolution would need to change as well. Here's one more example. If the billy goats became wolves, then they might live in a deep, dark forest in Alaska, and they might want rabbits to eat, and hunters might stand in their way. I hope these gave you a few examples to help you when you are choosing an adaptation for your writing. Don't forget to check out some of the other adaptations in our classroom library to help give you ideas.